all the time is the more time that I spent working in the business, the less time I had to work on the business. When I first started the business, I'm not joking, I thought I was going to be driving supercars in a couple of years. Boy, oh boy, let me tell you the difference. All right, what is up, everybody? Episode 11 of Pursuit of Balance. We're going to talk about a special one that I don't get to talk about a lot, I feel like. Normally, I try to keep it around, health and fitness, longevity, all that good stuff. But today, we're going to talk about business, right? And this is something that I generally try to get polls on Instagram every once in a while, just kind of get an idea of what you guys want to hear. And obviously, I do have a lot of audience as far as just my personal Instagram that are in the fitness industry, coaching, I got some friends that are business owners. So business stuff does pop up. And sometimes, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but sometimes I just feel like, I don't know if that's really what my channel's focused on. But I did one a while ago last year called The Dark Side of Entrepreneurship. And people loved it. I loved it. I just love speaking on business personally. So I really wanted to do another business one. So I'm glad it was brought up. So, excuse me, I was kind of polling between how to become a good leader or, are you thinking about starting a business or prerequisites? So I kind of funneled it down and I'm going to go with kind of the prerequisites to starting a business, right? Because I think I do have a handful of people, that like to ask me questions about how I got the gym started or thinking about starting a business or a gym of their own. And just kind of like little tips and points. So I kind of want to go through this, and the framework for me is more of what are the things that you maybe should have in place prior to opening up a business? Because I will say this, I think a business and running a business or running your own thing is probably one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done in my life. But it is also the most challenging and stressful thing I've also done in my life because it comes with a lot of hurdles, right? And I was just talking to Chaz and Elliot about this with, some of the stats. And I wanted to kind of open up with this, right? Which was okay, let's go through the percentage, right? So I'm a very kind of logical brain type of person, and I'm a numbers guy. So numbers for me was always kind of the thing that made sense. So based off what I found, there's 5 million businesses that start every single year, right? And I think this was basically some of the research was based off business applications. So through LegalZoom and kind of collecting all that data of how many people are starting LLCs or corporations or businesses in general, right? So 5 million of these businesses are going to start every single year, right? And I wrote down these stats. Within the first year, the fail rate is going to be 20 to 22%, right? Meaning out of 5 million, close to 1 million of those are going to fail within the first 12 months, right? Within 5-year period, it's going to be closer to 50%, meaning out of those 5 million that started this year, 5 years from now, 2.5 million of those will close their doors, right? And within a 10-year period, 65 to 67% are going to fail. So when you look at the fail rate, it's pretty astronomical, right? And this is when I took these numbers and I was getting this data, I was looking at all businesses within all industries. And as I was just telling them, I was one of the interesting stats was gyms was a top 3 failure rate, right? I think restaurants were number 1, whatever it was. So different industries, I think, obviously come with different risk and, are just harder to keep a business sustainably alive. Now, the other interesting fact that I looked up was, I was okay, how many businesses actually break $1 million a year, right? And it was a single digit, right? So in the gym industry, it was saying 1 to 3% was some of the data I found. And then in just all industries across the board, it was closer to 5 or 7% that actually break a 7-figure annual top line revenue, right? Now, the interesting fact behind that is when you look up net margins, the average net margin across all industries was 7%, meaning if you made $1 million a year in your business, you would be taking home 7% of that as a take home, meaning I would make $70K a year, right? And if you were to look at gym industries, there was anywhere from 5% kind of on the low end up to 20, 25%. So for some of these higher end boutique gyms that are doing really well. So when you do the math on it, it's if I was lucky enough to be in the single digit top percentage of business, I would be able to take home anywhere from 50K up to 200 to 250K a year. Now, obviously, our brains love to kind of gravitate towards the potential of what if it does work, which is how hopefully all of us should run everything as an employer or employee is stay optimistic and obviously making it work. But when you look at the data, majority of businesses over time are going to fail. Majority, 90+% of businesses are never going to break seven figures, and majority of businesses are going to be in the single digit percentage of take home income, right? Just to kind of let the data talk a little bit, I think that, reflecting back, obviously, when I started the gym back in 2017, I didn't look at those numbers. I didn't think about that data. I was young, I was ambitious, and I just wanted to make it work, right? Fast forwarding now, it's like, okay, 2025, I have two locations. Both of these gyms will break seven figures. So I've been lucky enough to not only have a business that I enjoy, but that obviously is successful in itself, to have a great team, to have a great clients. So I kind of want to share my story, and I want to make sure that I'm not making it sound like, oh, it's about me and like, here's my cocky story about how I made everything work. I'm just going to share my story and my perspective on the things that if I were to do anything different, if I were to rewind myself back to 25-year-old Corey when I first opened a business, for someone that's listening to this, that's thinking about starting, that the things that I had kind of in my head of like, I need to have this in place before I go start a business, right? So that's kind of the frame of today, is like, what are the prerequisites that are necessarily required, right? So the first thing I wrote down is you need to figure out why you want to get in business. And I think this is an important one for so many people, because I think sometimes, we look at business, there's a lot of ego tied to like the title, right? A lot of us get hooked in work with not even just as an employer, but also an employee, of like the title that we have in work, right? It's like, is your ego tied to the money that you're going to make? Is your ego tied to the title of having that? Is it because you see a gap in the market that you can fill for your product or service? Is it because you don't like being told what to do? You don't like bosses, or you like kind of having the freedom of creating your own structure? I think the first thing to always come to really like a true answer to yourself with is like, what am I actually going into entrepreneurship for? Right. And no matter what it is, I don't think there's a wrong or right answer. I think it's really important to make sure that you can do your best to like have let your ego talk a little bit, but then also try to do your best to take your ego out of it and think about the long term, right? Because just based off the data alone, you're getting into a really, really high risk thing, right? And you're not even just risking your time, you're risking money, you're risking other people's money, you're risking people losing their jobs, your employee, you're risking clients. Obviously, there's so much risk in it. So I think the first thing is to really be concrete on it, right? So to kind of start with my story a little bit, when I first started working out my junior year of high school is when I first started getting into like lifting weights. And I remember I was working at Extreme Fitness in Morgan Hill, and it was like, I'm not joking, immediate. Like within like 6 months of working there, or not working out there, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like I just found so much joy in being in the gym. I loved the culture of the gym. I grew up with parents, if I were to kind of even rewind back farther, but my mom worked at 24 Hour Fitness for a long time. I always kind of said this in a podcast earlier this season of like, I grew up in the daycare at 24 Hour Fitness. My dad was very into fitness. So both my parents are both, athletic and active and gym goers. So being influenced by my parents as a kid was obviously something that had influence in my career choice. But the thing that I think was like the first realization for me of like, okay, I think I want to get into business, or I know I want to get into business, was how much friction I had towards being told what to do, right? So for me, when I say like, what's the why? The why, I think the strongest why for me originated from like, I don't like being told what to do by teachers. I don't like being told what to do by coaches. I don't like being told what to do by my parents. Like I hated that kind of confinement, right? Which is why I tend to have so much pushback, excuse me, on still today on like anything, right? It doesn't matter if it's laws or if it's government or if it's people telling me what to do or clients or coaches. Like my ego comes up and hits the wall first of like, don't tell me what to do. I've gotten now way better at obviously, losing my ego a little bit and being able to kind of take a lot of that stuff with a grain of salt and understand what is important, what's actionable, what's good and bad information for me to kind of take home and move forward with. But that was kind of the originating thing for me. It was like, okay, I don't really want to be told what to do the rest of my life. So I know I'm probably not going to be the best employee. And that being said, another part that I'll bring up in a second, like throughout work and throughout sports and throughout school, I did good in school. I did good in sports. I was a good employee, but I always felt like I wasn't a good student, athlete, or employee when it came to the aspect of managing, right? Like I was good at producing the results that I was there to do, right? So in athletics or as a student or as an employee at a work job, whatever it might be. But I wasn't as good at like accepting management and control and you need to wear this and you need to do this, you need to say it this way. I was always really just kind of fixated on like I want to do it my own way, right? I wanted that freedom. So when I say like find your why, I think it's really important to like, not only just mentally think about that, but write these things down. Like what are the things maybe if you are someone that's interested in starting a business, what are the things that are really pulling you towards entrepreneurship, right? And find the core thing of like, as a personality, right? Emotionally, mentally, like, there's all these things I'm going to talk about today. But what is like the core thing of what's driving me towards that, right? The other layer of it was obviously just being in athletics and being in fitness is like I was always surrounded by it and I enjoyed it. And for me, there was something of like being in business for something that was actually productive for society and good for people, and also a market that is never going to leave. And if anything, just be in more demand was another interesting pull towards it. And I remember back in 2017, well, it's actually funny. I worked at Gilroy Health and Fitness as my second job. And there was this when CrossFit was starting to kind of get bigger and a little bit more mainstream. And there was this building across the street from the gym I worked at. And I remember going home one day and I told my parents, I was like, I think I want to open a CrossFit gym. I was like 18, maybe at the time, maybe 19, whatever it was. And I was like, but I need some money. I need to borrow some money because obviously I don't have any money. I'm an 18-year-old. And they're like, we're not giving you any money, right? And I was like, CrossFit's also it's not gonna be that successful for you to make money, right? Which is, I think as a parent, if you are a parent listening to this and then maybe have a kid going into entrepreneurship or starting something of their own, it's a very normal thing, I think, as a parent to be defensive or more risk adverse towards like, okay, like what if this does fail, right? Like looking at some of the data points that I just mentioned already. So I never held that against my parents for them being like doubtful, right? And even when I started the gym, they were like, but they still talk about it today that they were worried about me starting the gym and losing money or losing other people's money and failing, right? And when you think about the failure part, outside of just the money and time and energy that goes into starting something, it's the mental component of what it does for you for the rest of your life. Because some people are more risk tolerant and more failure tolerant, meaning like you might be someone that's able to lose or able to take L's and kind of move forward and stay optimistic and stay positive. Some people aren't, right? Some people, it is a dramatic change in their mental state for either a very long period of time or maybe even the rest of their lives. And I think sometimes the unfortunate part about anything failure, right? It doesn't matter if it's relationship failure. It doesn't matter if it's, it's sports, it's school, it's work. We tend to we kind of hold on to that and make that part of our identity, right? And I think that like, that's one of the things I'll talk about, like how you operate with other things in your life needs to be kind of signs and data points for you to really think about, is entrepreneurship going to be the thing for me that is really going to be something I'm actually interested in doing? Because there's a lot of obstacles and hurdles and stresses and just being blindsided consistently that are a part of entrepreneurship. And I think that's the part that necessarily is not as easy because it's not as like secure and linear and, just stable as being an employee, right? Like being an employee obviously has its stress, obviously has its hurdles, obviously has its things that come with it. But being on both sides now, I can tell you it's a hell of a lot more consistent on what to expect because you have your structure, you have your schedule, you have your job description, like you're outside of some of like kind of the variable items of work most of the time. So I think it kind of leaves some of that risk outside of it, right? Second thing I say is like, I want you to think about what you want to do, how you want to run it, how you want to operate it, right? Like, do you want to be a solopreneur? Do you want to do something that you do by yourself, right? Like it's just a little project of, and I think that's the cool thing about business, right? So I put like solo versus a team, online versus in person, especially with where we are in kind of like just society. It's like, I don't know what the actual data point is on this, but I'm sure there's probably a competing amount of online businesses as there are in-person businesses now too. Back in the day, I mean, I'm not that old, but like back in the day, I didn't think about an online business ever being even a thought. For me, it was always just like, oh, like we're doing brick and mortar, we're doing in person. And I started off with like a couple people as employees for me when I first started, and now we're at a team of 17. Like I always never wanted to do something alone. I never wanted to do something online. And that's another thing that I think like when you kind of figure out like when you're mapping out this like quest for yourself or this journey of entrepreneurship, is like what is kind of the current state of how you're going to start it, but more importantly like the end game of like where you not end game necessarily like it's ending. I don't like the idea of that. Just like, but where is the trajectory going, right? Like, am I growing a big team? Am I doing this online? Am I doing this in person? Something we were just talking about literally was like this, businesses that are closing down in Willow Glen. Chaz and Elliot were talking about how this baby stroller, company just took over a 3,000 square foot. And I was like, I always find it interesting for some companies that have storefronts. It's like, you're paying the rent, you're paying sometimes property insurance and property taxes to have the building on a business that can probably operate just as successfully online. And like, why not wait, right? Before you go brick and mortar and go retail, right? Why not keep it online? Why not grow that presence first? So I think it's really kind of getting some of the moving parts first, right? Is like understanding, okay, like what is operationally going to be needed for this business? And more importantly, what's going to be more in alignment operationally for what kind of business I want to run? For me, I always liked having a team, right? I grew up with two younger brothers. So as an older brother, and this was something that's kind of part of my journey is like, I think like, another aspect of like leadership in a sense, or just entrepreneurship that was like kind of inherent to me was like being an older brother of two. As an older sibling, I think you kind of take a little bit of kind of, I don't know, you take a lot more on, I think, just unconsciously of like what you're trying to show to your younger siblings, right? The example that you're trying to set, etc. Throughout my, even like when I got out of my home and out of my parents' house, and I started living on my own, like being kind of taking care of my friends as a matter of paying for things or just making sure everyone's safe. Like I always felt like I took that burden on unconsciously. Like it wasn't necessarily like, oh, I'm choosing to do so. It's just like who I was, and I think some people really have a good ability of doing that. And I'm not necessarily saying that you have to be an older sibling to run a business, but I think of like inherently who you are as a person and will dictate how you operate as a business, right? Your ability to communicate, your ability to foster relationships, your ability, like those are all things that are going to help you build a team. Those are all things that are going to help you grow a business. So trying to figure out some of the operational kind of moving parts, I think, is another thing. So those are like kind of like the first two things I would say. Like, if this is something that has interest to you, figure out some of those little moving parts first. Figure out the core of kind of the driver and the why, because then we can get into what we're going to talk about now, which is going to be in the majority of today's episode of like, these are the prerequisites that you need to have in different categories, I personally believe, before you can get into something and at least have a higher chance of being successful, or more importantly, have a higher chance of enjoying that journey and process. So the first one I put down is like, ask yourself, are you ready to take it all on, right? And I put this into 4 categories. Number 1 is kind of the mental readiness side of it, right? So the resilience, the problem-solving mindset, your curiosity, your adaptability. So adaptability, I'll start with first. In business, I think this is probably one of the most important skill sets to have. I used to say this in sports all the time, that I think some of the best athletes in the world are the ones that had the ability to adapt, right? The ability to adapt to a play call, the ability to adapt to playing different teams in different conditions and different weather. Adaptability, I think, is an important skill set to have as a human in general. And this is also something I want to kind of make clear. I think that like, even though this podcast might feel like it's more specific to someone that's starting their own thing, these are all things to think about even inside of any leadership role. So if I'm going to go coach a sports team, becoming a parent, being a manager inside of a company, the entrepreneur, like there's so many different moving parts outside of the quote unquote ownership that this is going to have an impact on, right? So the ability to adapt, I think, is an important thing. And like the example that just to kind of share some that I had, when I first opened up the business, and I'll talk about the financial stuff in a second, but like, not knowing what to do required me to adapt really, really fast, right? Like I was like, oh, I don't know how to do permitting. This is something I got to figure out. Oh, I don't know how to deal with contractors. I don't know how to deal with the payments and the structuring. I don't know how to deal with, setting up timelines for these. I don't know how to hire people. I don't know how to market. Like there was still a lot of stuff that I was unknown, even though I came into it borderline cocky and confident of like, oh, I've been in the industry for a long time. I've been a top performer at most jobs and most gyms that I was at. So I have the skill set to be an entrepreneur, right? And I was telling this to Cisco and Paul Alto yesterday that I'm reading a book called E-Myth, and it's basically like E-Myth, like why most small businesses fails and how to fix that. That's like the name of the book. And the chapter that I'm on, chapter 2, he's talking about like basically there's kind of like 3 different like mindsets or entrepreneurs that exist. There's the entrepreneur, right? The dreamer, the person that's thinking big and what can we grow and how to create something different. Then there's the manager. How do I keep things organized? How do I keep things in order? How do I keep things operating, in an organized way? And then there's the technician who's just the workhorse, right? The person that just gets shit done. And the perfect entrepreneur obviously has a blend of all 3 of those things that is kind of his belief. And or more importantly, if you don't have all 3 of those, or you don't have one of those, you don't have 2 of those, you hire to fill those gaps, right? So being honest with yourself and having enough transparency, even like with yourself, and enough awareness, I mean, of like what you have and what you don't have, I think is a super, super important thing, because you have a couple options. You either dedicate all your time, energy, resources, and money into learning those skills so you can become successful in those areas, or you say, this is where I'm going to allocate my time and resources and energy, and I'm going to hire for these other things. Now, the hard part about the hiring part is, Silicon Valley, I live in an area that like, I think businesses kind of ran a little bit differently. Like tech is something that's kind of like almost created this like change in how people view entrepreneurship, right? It's like we're raising millions and millions of dollars, right? Through like raising capital, right? And then it's like, so you're able to afford to hire companies or hire people, I'm sorry, at the start, right? Versus most small businesses that are not able to take any investment, either through a loan or either through, people capital. They have to do a lot of this work on their own, and that's what makes it hard, right? So understanding kind of like that, like where do I need to adapt in the business as far as financial resourcefulness, or just the ability to kind of mentally be able to take on certain things and juggle all that, right? And the adaptability too of like, I left Equinox and I had a handful of clients that follow me over, right? So it's like I had my client base from Equinox, 70% of them follow me. I was able to be training my PT clients, which was honestly the only thing that allowed me to stay financially afloat with the business, because I didn't pay myself for almost 2 years from the company, right? So for 2 years, I did not make any money from the company. So it's like 2017, 2018, beginning of 2019 is when I started paying myself. If I didn't have my PT clients, I don't think I would have been able to survive. I don't think I would have had enough savings to be able to kind of make that float. But the beautiful thing about it was like, okay, I have a little bit of a cushion, but I also need to now incorporate the time that I'm investing into my PT business, which is almost in a sense separate from the gym, to then put time for sales, time for the classes that we started. Because when I started the gym, I didn't do any personal training as far as the business model. It was just classes. So I needed to do sales. I needed to do marketing. I needed to do B2B outreach. And so I spread myself very, very thin. And I only had my brother and Mike, and Jason helped us a little bit in the beginning. So I only had like a couple people that we were really doing. So we were working 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. 6 days a week, right? The 6th day probably was more like a 6-hour day instead of like a full 12, 14-hour day sometimes. So I was just energetically getting drained very, very fast, but I was running on adrenaline. I was running on motivation. Anything new in life, it's like relationships. It's the honeymoon phase that you go through. So you're able to kind of push through a lot of that and just kind of grit, which is, another thing that I wrote down kind of on the emotional side. You're able to kind of push through that, I think, in the beginning, but this is where I think a lot of the failure stuff happens, is like, you're going to start getting punched in the face really, really quick, metaphorically, right? And that could be either financially, that could be stress, or that could just be the lack of energy that you have to carry on it, right? And something that, a quote that I forget who says this, but I say this all the time, is the more time that I spent working in the business, the less time I had to work on the business, right? And that's super, super important as an entrepreneur or a manager or whatever role is running kind of that side of the growth of the company. In order for your company to sustain the growth, right? Like something we were actually just talking about too is like, my rent increases 3 to 5% a year, depending on the location, right? Like my cost for towels go up, my cost for insurance, like all these things go up over time, and I've always tried to do my best never to raise my prices, but I've done it 3 times in 8 years. So it's like, sometimes I have to, just to accommodate everything else going up, and just, it's not even necessarily to raise prices to make more money. It's just raise prices to break back where we were previously. So curiosity is another one that I wrote. Like, you got to be curious, and that is kind of in relationship to the growth part. Problem solving mindset. This is probably the most straightforward answer I can give you guys. Like, there is going to be so many problems that are going to come that you are not going to foresee. You don't know what you don't know. And that's something that sometimes can be analysis paralysis for some people. Like, oh, I need to solve all these problems. That's why listening to an episode like this or following things of other business owners that have gone through their journey is so important. That's something I wish I probably even did a better job, like kind of reflecting back. Maybe I would have streamlined it a little bit faster. Maybe I would have been able to pay myself faster. Maybe I would have been to hire more people faster, etc. And then resilience, like you have to be good at taking, and I say L's. It's not like, I think sometimes, like, I don't ever view anything that I've done in my business as a failure or loss. I've just gone through hurdles, right? And I think that could be a little bit of a perception sometimes, because like there's going to be things that some people view as that's a failure, that's a loss. There's just been a lot of things that I was required to pivot on faster, right? I was like, okay, I need to change that. That doesn't work, right? That could be operationally how we were coaching. That could be a programming thing. It's like I started with 12 people a class. I didn't like it. I moved down to 10. I changed the pricing. I changed how it was structured. I changed my offering on the marketing. There's a lot of stuff in the beginning really, really fast that you need to change. But you also need to be resilient for like, hey, some of those things aren't going to work. That's part of the process, right? And when I say reflect back as a prerequisite, if you're someone that's not good at doing that at work, like this is one of the things that I've looked at is like, if you're stressed out with work right now, I would really, really, really second guess starting your own thing, right? And I say this not to be cocky, but I didn't ever view as an employee when I was working for other gyms. I worked for, I don't know, I would say anywhere between, I would think it was like 7 or 8 different gyms prior to me starting my own. I never viewed any of those things like I went home like, oh, I hate my job. This is stressful. Like I was like, I enjoyed my work, right? And I think sometimes I see that just internally with people that are stressed out with internal part of the work. And I'm like, well, don't ever fucking start your own thing, because it just gets way worse and it's less premeditated. Like, as an employee, some of the things that are stressful, you kind of see coming. You're like, okay, I know I got more work coming. I know I'm entering a season of this. Over time in entrepreneurship, obviously you get more educated and matured of understanding what is coming. But a lot of it is just blindsided, right? Like I think about some of the most stressful times that I had. 3 things that pop up in my mind. When I say 3 things, these are kind of 2 of them are going to be kind of similar because they're just opening up locations, right? The reason why opening up locations sucked is because contractors are probably some of the least reliable people that I've ever found, and you require a fuck ton of managing. Dealing with the city is one of the worst nightmares that I've ever gone through. Dealing with permitting process, dealing with inspections, dealing with laws, dealing with regulations that change. And a lot of that stuff is just blindsided stuff. Like I had no idea what to expect. In the first one, I think the lack of knowing what to expect made it easier than it did on my final one, right? So it's like now I did Palo Alto 1.0, I've done Mountain View, and I did Palo Alto 2.0. So I've done 3 builds. Palo Alto 2.0 was just as stressful as Mountain View. And I would say Palo Alto 1.0 was probably the least stressful. And the reason why is like, I had no idea. I was just open to it. I was like, fuck it. Like whatever comes, comes. Like this is normal. As you start to learn, you kind of start to become a little bit more like, okay, this is what it should be like. This is what I'm expecting from the previous time. And then in reality, you get smacked in the face and of like, oh, fuck, like that's not how this city does it. Or, hey, those laws were different in 2017. They're not like that now in 2025. It's like a lot of that stuff changes. Second part is getting into the emotional readiness, right? So self-awareness, emotional or EQ, emotional regulation, grit, and patience. Patience is one of those things just to kind of start there that if you want to get in business and you want to get in business for the sake of notoriety, or you want to get in the sake of just making a lot of money. When I first started the business, I'm not joking, I thought I was going to be driving supercars in a couple of years, because I was like, yeah, I was the kid that had the supercars in the closet. I always was money hungry. I was always excited about doing my own thing. Boy, oh boy, let me tell you the difference. Like, it has been 8.5 years of running this business, and I think literally a year and a half ago or a year ago was probably the first time that I was like, fuck, the business is in a good place. Like I financially can sustain this to grow a family, take care of my wife. But it took me 8 years to get there to even feel, I would say, like, to that secure level, right? It took me 6.5 years. I never felt insecure because transparently, I was never really someone that was scared of like knowing how to make money, because I had that skill set from previous jobs. But also I didn't really have the most expensive lifestyle. So for me, it's like, I can live in a fucking van on the side of a beach and be totally fine, right? So like I had a very low wall of like needs that I needed to fulfill. And obviously my now wife, girlfriend at the time, was working. She was making money. So like we were able to live a life that was totally fine. But I made more money as an employee when I was working at Equinox doing my own thing. Like, I always say when I first moved up to San Jose, I remember sitting in the Bay Club parking lot. when I first applied for Big Club. So I was probably 21 at the time. And I said, by 23, I'm going to make six figures. By 30, I want to be worth $1 million. I was able to make six figures by the time I was 23, right? Both of my own thing and working at Equinox. So it's like I've made six figures by the time I was 23 working there. And I was able to hit that $1 million net worth. So like I hit those goals, right? And I was very gun ho on like making that. I don't think I've really put a goal since that parking lot situation, really financially since, right? And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but I think it's important to kind of have like targets that you're shooting for. But patience is one of those virtues that you need to have because it is a lot slower and a lot harder than what the internet makes it seem like, right? Now, don't get me wrong. If you have certain skill sets or certain opportunities in the market, there is those kind of like certain stories that you hear of like someone that makes crazy amounts of money or someone's like uber successful. The overnight success though is definitely a myth because I think so many people just forget to oversee the failures and the things that didn't work in the beginning or how long it took before it actually skyrocketed. And that's one thing you just need to be like really just like in touch with. Emotional regulation. When you are overworked, when you're spending a lot of energy, when you're spending a lot of your money and your resources on building something and you hire people, there's going to be a lot of times where you want it done your way when you are an entrepreneur. And this is something that I dealt with. And you need to remember, and this is something that like, my parents always say like the reason why they never hired a property manager for their properties, because like my parents were in real estate is kind of their business. And the reason why they never really hired anybody and did everything themselves is because they feel like they can never find somebody to do it as good as them, right? And the one thing that I always like to say to them and myself as a reminder is no one will ever do it as good as I am. Not necessarily because they don't have the skill set. I think there's plenty of coaches that I have on this team that have a better skill set than I do, but it's the conviction of it being your own thing, right? So it's like, when you don't hire the person that's perfect for that role, and don't get me wrong, like I would say for the most part, the one thing that I've gotten very lucky at, and I don't know if it's more luck or not, of like I've gotten lucky to find really, really good people as far as the team goes. But I've had 3 duds that we've had to let go. I've had a couple people that I've hired that are like not, they're a C plus or a B player versus when I thought they were going to be an A player when I hired them. Like you're going to run into those situations, but for the most part, I've been very, very lucky about that. And I say luck because I don't think everyone necessarily is going to get that luck, but I also think there is a degree of like my network was my ability to build my business off referrals, right? Like if I didn't know as many people as I knew from just being in the industry for a long time, being in this area for a long time and having good relationships with a lot of people, which is like one of those things on like the other aspects of like building a business is like, if you're not good at nurturing the current relationships that you have, if you're not someone that's really liked by a lot of people, if you're not someone that's really able to build a following even outside of owning a business, that's another thing that I would really probably think about opening up a business because those are inherent prerequisites that you need to have in order to grow a team, to grow a client, to grow a following, to be able to go get investors, to be able to go do all these things. Like people need to trust you. People need to like you. And if they don't, for the majority, that should be another one of those signs, right? So emotional regulation, I think like there's going to be so many times, and this is something I wouldn't say, I do a better job at work at just covering it up. When I'm stressed, I don't go home and take it out on my wife. I don't take it out on my employees. But I think that the longer I've worked with my team, the longer I've been with my wife, obviously, like they can just see it unconsciously through my body language. But emotional regulation is something I think is super, super important to have because like when you are stressed out and you are someone that does take it and project it, that is going to be a very, very negative impact on the culture of your team, the energy of your team, the client experience, right? And like obviously depending on whatever business you're in. So having emotional regulation, I think, is one of those things that needs to be at the top of the list of things that are a prerequisite, right? Self-awareness, we kind of touched on a little bit. Next one is occupational readiness. So I put transferable skills, right? So for me, what I wrote down is like sales, marketing, leadership, accounting, operation, ability to create and nurture relationships, right? My journey in the industry was I started at a front desk, did graveyard shift, then I went to a day shift, then I went into membership advisor, then I went into assistant fitness manager, general manager, then I went into training. So I actually went through the operational management and sales back end first. Which was the best thing that I ever could have done for my career. So when I say occupational readiness, if you're someone that's thinking about starting a business in an industry that you have not worked almost all positions or had exposure to those things, I would really, really say pause, think about trying to get experience in that, right? So I have people even on my team, people that I've worked with in the past, people that I just have friends or followers that ask me those things. And that's honestly one of the things that I put at the top of the list of like, you need to make sure that you get experience in all aspects of the business, because that is the thing that will rock you the most is when you get into entrepreneurship is you now need to be that person, right? Because unless you're lucky enough to be able to raise capital or have investors or have good credit to get a good loan and be able to afford to be able to pay that, you're still going to need enough of the skill sets on the sales and marketing side to get the people in, right? And this is like when you think about the manager and the technician part of the entrepreneur, you can have the best product and the best service in the world, but if you cannot get people into your business to buy your product, your business will fail, right? The better your marketing is, the less you'll need to sell, right? The better your product or service is, the less you'll need to market, right? So the first and most important thing is you need to make sure that your product or service that you're building or trying to create is A, a gap in the market, and B, is so much better than somebody else's. And when I say that, that's the quality of it or it's the price of it. I am personally someone that doesn't like to commoditize business. I don't want to just fight for the bottom and fighting the lowest person. When I started the business, for me, what I was really trying to afford was like my model was different. No one was doing 10 people a class with 2 coaches, right? It was either big group or personal training. My programming was a little bit different. I wanted to find something like CrossFit that kind of connected corrective exercise and more rehab and postural and mobility into it. I wanted to price myself in a place that was going to have less people per class and have a more serious buyer. Not to say that people that can't afford gym stuff, that it's not a luxury purchase, are not going to be serious, but there's data that obviously proves it that like Planet Fitness clients are going to be much different than an Equinox clients, right? So it's kind of one of those things that I personally selected. Like, I want to work with more serious people. It was very important for me from a client perspective when I was a trainer to find motivated clients. And your pricing will do that, right? Your pricing will also give you the ability. I'll give you another fun fact. My business with both locations, I run about close to a 60% of my expenses are payroll alone. If you were to go open up a franchise, Orange Theory, F45, any franchise in the fitness industry, they tell you to shoot for 30%, right? It's like, so if my business does let's say, just make numbers easy, does $2 million this year, $1.2 million of my expenses or just total revenue is going to go towards just paying the people. I always saw turnover being such a big problem in my industry. And I thought like, okay, what's the one thing that solves as an employee the turnover, right? It was, for me, it was like the ability to learn, the ability to earn, and the ability to have some autonomy, right? It was like, okay, I want people to make money and I want people to be able to not really have a cap on how much money they can make, right? So being able to charge more on a client front and change the model of how we structured it not only got me a more serious client, but it also gave me more leeway and room to pay a coach to be more successful and operate a life that they can have even internally without owning their thing. I wanted something that was going to give a platform for coaches to learn. For me, I'm so big on self-education, and just my one-on-one meetings or my team meetings, for me, it's a lot of just like, I want to empower my coaches. I want to educate them. So that was another thing that was important for me. Number 3 was autonomy. I wanted to give coaches the thing that sometimes I felt like I was annoyed of, like the problem I dealt with as an employee is the problem I was trying to solve for my team, right? It's like, I don't want them to hopefully have those same problems. Don't get me wrong. If we were to put all 17 coaches on this mic and tell them what's the problem with FL, I'm sure they'll have things maybe sometimes I'm not even aware of yet, but like I was trying to, have enough integrity to be like, these are the things that would make me happy with work, right? It's like good work culture, very laid back, autonomy to do what you want. If you want to make money, I'm going to push you. If you want to make impact, I'm going to push you. If you want to have low hours and just have a good work-life balance, cool, I'll accommodate that. And we'll just hire more to fill the gaps. But being able to charge that was obviously the thing that kind of gave me that. So I had a really, really strong sales background. I did not have a really strong marketing background. I had I would say a good marketing background, maybe inherently, because just through like Instagram and just fucking selfies all day, all those kind of things. So I learned marketing pretty quickly. And I think sales and marketing are parallels as far as like the skill sets that are learned. Leadership is one of those things, right? I think if you're not a natural leader, you either need to learn how to become it, or you need to really figure out, how do I hire someone that is a good leader and I just be more back end, right? Because like when you think about business part of it, between the solo, between the team, the online, the in-person, also understand that you could be a business owner that's in the business. You can be a business owner that's behind the curtains. You can just be an investor that doesn't have anything to do with it besides, quarterly board meeting, and it just invests money and obviously collects dividends or, whatever. Like there's different ways to kind of structure ownership, which is like if I was an employee that didn't want to own a business, it's like, well, I could still invest in stocks, which makes me quote unquote a business owner. I can invest in real estate. I can invest in other things. So you can still invest and become quote unquote a business owner, but you're not necessarily the operator. So that's another thing to kind of think about for those kind of people thinking. So leadership, accounting, that was one thing. I'm super, super OCD about numbers, right? So understanding what money's coming in, what percentage is being allocated to employees, what percentage is being allocated towards rent, how much rent can I afford based off the amount that I'm paying employees, the insurance, right? The taxes, all the stuff that you're going to go through with the permits, right? Your job supplies, your utilities, like there's so many little costs that comes in. And if you're not good at accounting, and for me, I was always really, really good about just managing my own money. I think that's something that I would say would probably be a good prerequisite for someone to be successful in entrepreneurship is like, if you're not good with your own personal finances, like you have credit issues, you're in debt, you're not good at managing that. That'd be one of those things I'd probably be like, maybe think about not running around, right? Or once again, figure out a way to hire for something that fills that gap. Something I touched on already was like the ability to create and nurture relationships. I honestly, if you're in a people business or a service business, or you're someone that's going to build a team versus do a solopreneur type of thing, like this is a top 3, top 5 thing for sure. Like if you cannot nurture and foster good relationships, my network has got me farther and faster in my career than almost most skill sets, probably maybe second to sales. And I will say that sales on the foundation of it is learning how to communicate. Learning how to communicate is not only made me good at sales and maybe better at marketing, but it's made me good with my relationship with my wife and my friends and my family. It's made me good at like the relationship that I have with my team because like I'm able to learn to be a better listener. I'm able to learn to be more empathetic. I'm able to learn the skill sets of communication that allow me to kind of foster all those other things too. So that's something I would think about. Next one, the financial readiness. I think this is obviously the one that most people think about. Like, I'm not talking about how to create a logo, how to structure your legal entity. I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about the prerequisites. Now, when it comes to the financial readiness, I'll give you guys an example. I started my business with little to no of my own money. And the entire time I knew I wanted to own a gym, I thought the thing that I needed to be doing was saving enough money. Now, what I did is I saved enough of a savings to make sure that I had leeway if things started going backwards. Then I can I can financially support the business. But the thing that triggered me to opening up my own gym was I had a client that said, you know what? I'll go half, right? I'll be a half partner with you. I'll pay for everything. I'll pay for the equipment. I'll pay for the remodel. Pay for the marketing fees. Cool. I'm ready to do this. Let's do it. I'll be the operator. Now, obviously it didn't work out. And I'm glad it didn't work out that way, but receiving a long text says I'm getting tattooed of like, I don't think this business is going to work. And I was like heartbroken of like, fuck, do I not do this? What I ended up doing is I pulled 3 people that I knew, close friends, one of my best friends, 2 people that I worked with, and I collected $12,500, $25,000, $25,000. So I got enough money to get the remodel done. I took out a loan on all the equipment, put it under my name personally, and that's how I started the business, right? So I basically had money from other people for the build out, and I had a loan against the equipment, and I had my own money and savings to nurture the business as far as like the marketing dollars I needed to put into it, or more importantly, like the payroll for the team that I had to pay them, right? And after the first year, one of my partners paid out the other 2 and 2x the return. So the person that put $25,000 got a $50,000 check a year later. The person that put $12,500 got a $25,000 check. Unheard of, phenomenal return. And as of this year, I just bought out my partner that was basically kind of a silent partner the whole time. And I 2x his return and said, hey, okay, well, I'm going to write you a $200,000 check. And now it's like all mine. I say that with like, it took me 8 years to even just get the financial like leeway and savings to be able to make a decision like that. But also the skill set that I had to be able to, the skill set and the friends that I had, the amount of times my accountant's been like, holy shit, like your friend's really like never taken any money from the business. And I'm like, never. I was like, I've never pulled any money out of the business. He's never pulled any money out of the business. The difference was I was on a salary after 2019. So I started writing myself a salary. Another thing to think about with the hurdle is like, I didn't pay myself 17. I didn't pay myself 18. I paid myself 19. I paid myself 3 months of 2020. Then I didn't pay myself the rest of the year because of the pandemic. And I was like, okay, I need to protect the business and the team. And then I started paying myself again in 21. So it's like 3 out of the 8 years I ran the business so far, I did not pay myself $1 in salary, right? And that's for something if you don't have the financial savings or the financial literacy of how to structure things or how to be adaptive in those things, that could bury a business. There's the reason why so many businesses failed in the pandemic. So those are like some of those little things that I was like, okay, I need to be just like financially literate to understand how these things work, right? How taxes, how my legal structure of like why I did an S corporation taxation for an LLC instead of just sole proprietor or a C corp, right? How I, leverage some of the tax write-offs for the things that I use for like my truck, right? Like that's a tax write-off because that's my work truck. Like those are things that I needed to learn, but I studied a lot of that stuff and I read a lot of that stuff in the very early part of my career. And it's honestly something I probably still put as much energy until today as I did in the beginning. So understanding that, so having a runway, having savings, have the ability to borrow to get from investors, I think is two things. The ability to have enough trust and relationships with those people that are going to trust you to give you money because like there is a high risk for them of giving you money for, I mean, think about the failure rate. Like if I was an investor giving you money for your ice cream shop, it's like there's a good chance that business fails and I never get my money back, right? Or I only get some of my return back. So there is a lot of risk. So having like I was so lucky to have three people that were close to me to trust me enough to give me money for a business to be an ownership in a business and then trust me to give them money back or pay them out, right? And that's something that came from like fostering the relationship. Second thing is like having good enough credit to be able to go borrow money, right? Now, borrowing money like today's day, like in 2025, it's obviously slowly getting a tiny bit better, but like it's very expensive to borrow money now, right? So it's like you're borrowing money, what you used to be able to borrow at like 2 or 4%. Now it's like 6, 8, 10, 12%, depending on how your credit is. And like those are things that if you have terrible credit, you're going to have a hard time borrowing money against what you need. I borrowed money in Mountain View. I did half the borrow. I borrowed 100K when I opened a Mountain View and I put the rest in myself. My Palo Alto 1.0, I did none of my money. I just kept it for marketing and just payroll. And then Palo Alto 2.0, I paid for the whole thing myself. So it's like there's been an evolution of like leveraging and how to learning that. But there's a lot of financial literacy, I think, that comes into just like understanding those. So I think like those are important kind of like things and hurdles for you guys to figure out. Debt tolerance and management. Some people are really, really good at like having a lot of debt. Debt is the most expensive thing. Like the two worst debts that you can have in life are credit card debt and student loan debt. Not only because their interest rate is some of the highest, but like student loan, I actually don't think you can file like bankruptcy on and actually like waive. Like there's certain things like if I fail the business, like, one of the weird things about America is I can file bankruptcy and remove my debts against the business in my name. Obviously, it's going to hurt me credit wise. But I think having debt tolerance is something that's going to be part of it because that is an element of risk. If you're making $1 million a year, but you're $2 million in debt, you're a negative $1 million, right? As far as your net worth, because you have more debt against the business than revenue. For me, I'm not someone that likes having a lot of debt. I like having a little bit. I think it's important to leverage money because like if I can learn how to make money from a business that other people put money in to pay for, and I can pay them back at an interest where they make more money on their money, and I can learn to make money for myself, my team, and service clients, like that's a win-win as far as the business model. But you need to understand kind of part of that game in order to be able to do that successfully, I think, too, right? Basic accounting skills, like I talked about already. So understanding taxes, understanding cash flow, understanding margin. Next one I have is define your success and freedom and life goals, right? This is kind of just wrapping this all up is like success is different for all of us. Freedom is different for all of us. And the life goals that you have for you are going to be different. Me taking risk when I was 25, like technically at the time I was single when I first started it, versus now married, trying for kids next month. It's like, there's a lot more elements of risk in me starting something new later in life. Right. So it's like, understand the risk around you too and the people that you have an impact of like, hey, am I going to negatively impact my savings for my family, for my kids, for my wife or husband? Like those would be things you need to kind of think about. Freedom for me is probably the most important thing that I think about is like, I want to have a business that I can have work-life balance and have the ability to choose what I want to do. I deal with this dynamic all the time of like, go to another location, keep growing the business and just be like focused on growth. Right. But I know that comes with a sacrifice. Like I have two clients that I train, right? That are net worth probably billionaire with a B, right? Like I have some very successful clients, right? And it's been such a big impact to me just seeing what they go through and how they operate their lives and how they operate their business. And I'm going to tell you right now that both of them that I think about, I don't think I would trade my life for. Right. And I'm someone that is money hungry. And the reason why is the amount of stress and work and things that go into getting to that level. I don't think for my life is what I want, right? I want to have enough freedom to be able to control some of those things. So I think that's kind of like an element of something you should think about is like, what is your success look like, right? Is your success just making enough money to replace your income? Because I'll give you an example. My top trainer here is making $180,000 this year, right? Most gym owners, I would probably, if I were to just guess, are probably not even making that. So it's like you can make more money internally as an employee than you can as an entrepreneur or a business owners a lot of times, right? And if you don't have that skill set to be the top person in your company, you probably shouldn't even think about being an entrepreneur to begin with, right? Like you should be at the top of your food chain. And if you're not there yet, you make that your priority before you jump to the next thing of doing it on your own. Because there's people that make more money as employees as they do as business owners, right? Now there's people, obviously, because we always like to cherry pick, there's business owners that make a fuck ton of money, but like unfortunately, that is like a single digit percentage of people, right? Passion or not, this is like kind of the last part I want to leave with you guys is like, I've heard some people talk about like, you shouldn't get into your passion. You should just pick something that's like financially or like the best way to run a business from a numbers perspective. I would beg to differ. I think what makes my business enjoyable and what allowed me to be successful on the financial side of it was the fact that I am very passionate about helping people and doing these things. It allows me to like take money, like this podcast, right? It's like this podcast doesn't make me money; it costs me money, but it's something I enjoy because I feel like it helps other people, right? So for me, it's a passion thing still that has led me to kind of monetize my passion. The scary thing about monetizing passion when you connect those two things is like if it's not doing well, your passion is something that could possibly leave. Like you can lose your passion because the monetization of it ruined your experience with it. So that is obviously kind of like the juggling act of it. But I think no matter what, like if you are, just to kind of wrap this up and not ramble on too much, like if you're thinking about getting into business, understand that there's a lot of risks. I just think there's so many things that you can do in the front end to make you well and better prepared for it, of like everything that I talked about before you get into it. I don't know. It's funny because like over time, I feel like I've almost gravitated towards more people should not open a business than open a business because, a quote that I said in last season is like one of my clients, he was a class client in Palo Alto. He's no longer with us, but he moved. He says, I would never wish entrepreneurship on my worst enemy. Meaning like the amount of stuff that goes into it to actually make it work and become successful is a very, very, very hard thing to do on all elements, right? Your energy, your mental, your emotional state, your relationship, it's going to make an impact, right? Like, your finances, all this stuff that I don't really think most people should do it. Like if you're having a hard time working as an employee and being stressed out and not finding ways to be creative with that, that's kind of where I would start first. But I don't want to make it sound like I'm talking people away from it because like one of the best things I did in my life besides my wife was like my business. So I think my business has been one of the things that has the most impact. I just think it's something that most people should just like take a second thought against, right? All right, guys. Well, I hope you got some value out of that for those that wanted to hear it. And I will see you guys next week. Take care.